Welcome students to lesson 19 of the Living World topic and part 2 of our desert case study, a view into the Thar Desert and its opportunities and challenges. In this lesson we are going to be exploring the extent of the challenges facing the Thar Desert and its people, and you're going to understand why it is such a complicated question. Why do people live there? Please write the date, title and learning objective and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Time to review prior learning. Please write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory and then mark your answers. Game time. Number 1. The Thar Desert is in Asia between India and Pakistan. 2. The Thar Desert's population is approximately 30 million. 3. The wettest months in the Thar Desert are in the summer. 4. Renewable energy provides the electricity to the important towns in the Thar Desert. For example, Beleri has a solar power plant. 5. The 2 main ores that are mined in the Thar Desert are feldspar, used in paints and glass, and gypsum, used in plaster for walls in homes. 6. The arid climate makes farming challenging, but the Indira Gandhi Canal enables irrigation of the desert. 7. One important cash crop grown in the Thar Desert is mustard, which is exported globally. 8. The Desert Festival attracts more than 5,000 people annually for music, dancing, and camel rides. 9. A succulent is a type of plant, for example a cactus, that stores most of its water in its stem and thickened leaves. 10. The mesquite tree is adapted to deserts by having long tap roots that reach down to the water table underground. Give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or above, you are a star. You've learned everything that you need to know. Well done. Write any questions that you got wrong and their answers, and then test yourselves on these repeatedly. To introduce this lesson on the Thar Desert's challenges, I'm going to show you a photo, and around it will come some questions. Answer the questions using your understanding, and then we will discuss them. Go for it. Here are the questions. So number 1, how could government investment make this journey that you see here, people making, easier? Well, you could have said that the government might invest in more roads or more buses, it might invest in trains, it might invest in more modern or larger vehicles or more frequent vehicles, thereby reducing crowding and heat and journey time. 2. Why might a government not invest in transport infrastructure or transport vehicles in a hot desert? Well, you should have said that the demand for transport in most hot deserts is very low because of the low populations. Consequently, it does not make economic sense for most governments to invest in transport in hot deserts. For example, there are almost no roads or railways going across the Sahara Desert because very few people make that journey or live there. 3. What does the Thar Desert offer that attracts people to it? Well, in this lesson you're going to understand the problems, but you can think back to the previous lesson, in which case you will understand that it has agricultural opportunities as a result of the Indira Gandhi Canal. It has mining opportunities. Not only that, tourism is a large sector in the Thar Desert, and the major towns such as Jaisalmer and Beleri and Jodhpur provide many jobs. What challenges do people have to overcome to live in this place, in the Thar Desert? Well, consider a desert's climate. That is the principal challenge. The intense heat, the lack of rainfall. Think about the problems that would create if you're trying to have a job, especially in farming, or you're trying to move around, or you're trying to work with physical manual labour. Think about those challenges. We're going to understand them in greater detail. Also, just look at this picture and you'll see that that is a challenging way of transporting yourself and goods around a place. Okay, in this lesson you're going to understand 2 questions. First of all, what are the challenges that people experience in the Thar Desert? And secondly, to what extent have they overcome those challenges? So, keyword of today is salinization, the increased saltiness of water or land. That's a problem because salty water and salty land cannot support life. So salty land, plants can't grow, and salt water can't be used to grow crops or to hydrate people or animals. So what are the challenges of life in the Thar Desert? Write this title and underline it, please. The great challenges of the Thar Desert relate to its climate graph. The first one is the intense heat of the desert. In this photo here, this man on the left was working on a construction site in Jaisalmer, the main town in the Thar Desert, when he passed out from heat stroke. He was taken quickly to the local hospital, and here he's being treated with IV fluids and kept in a cool room to recover. He was lucky, he survived the day and he recovered, but many in the Thar Desert are not so lucky. The intense heat of the desert makes physical labour very difficult, and as a result, the productivity of things like construction jobs and manual labour is much lower, meaning that incomes are lower as a result. Additionally, the heat means that there are few roads connecting cities to the Thar Desert and the Thar Desert to other parts of India. Why? Because the tarmac that is used to build roads actually melts at very high temperatures, and so when it gets particularly hot in the Thar Desert, in the summer months especially, the roads can be damaged easily by transport going over them as they are soft and almost melted. Not only that, the shifting sands of the Thar Desert because of the strong winds mean that roads are quickly covered by sand and are no longer passable. Consequently, there is a lack of access for trade and for commuters, people moving to work in the Thar Desert. This also discourages tourists from arriving because they know that it's going to be difficult to reach remote areas within the desert. Remote means far away from anything else. The little public transport service that there is, this bus service is provided by the government, can only support a few people travelling every day, and the buses are irregular and unreliable. Consequently, if you're a businessman or a farmer and you're trying to transport your goods across the desert from town to town, it's difficult. The food might go bad, it might be stolen, it might be damaged in transit. If you are trying to get a job in a distant city, but your family lives far away, that is a difficult task too. Consequently, many people, especially rural people, are forced to live in low-income jobs distant from towns, or not enter into the Thar Desert at all. So the heat creates both a lack of access due to the lack of roads, and because of the low productivity of workers, it also discourages people from visiting and from migrating there for work. Consequently, the government does not invest as much as it could in transport infrastructure, which makes the problem worse. To what extent did they manage to overcome this challenge in the Thar Desert? Well, in the towns, buildings are usually designed with light colours, and the bricks are very light and they have natural ventilation, which means that they don't need air conditioning to remain cool. So within the buildings in the towns in the Thar Desert, to some extent people have been able to cope with the heat. However, the lack of funding for infrastructure projects and for clean water supplies means that, on the whole, people who live outside the cities struggle much more with the heat, also because they work in mining and farming, the primary sector. However, there's another important challenge. Look at the climate graph. It's not just about the temperature. The precipitation patterns are a major problem. For optimal, which means best, crop yields, land needs to have regular, relatively low rainfall throughout the year. So the UK receives regular rainfall throughout the year. By contrast, savanna grasslands and semi-arid areas, as well as some deserts like the Thar Desert, have very uneven rainfall, with a large amount of rainfall over just a few days or months, and a complete shortage of rainfall, a dry season between, for example, September and June annually. This restricts both crops growing and also prevents people from being able to set up permanent settlements, towns, because they know that the water supply will be unreliable. So the lack of precipitation is a problem. How have people tried to overcome this? Well, this picture that you see here is an example of a natural pond that forms in low-level areas in the Thar Desert. Because it's lower level, the altitude of the land is lower, the ground is closer to the water table. If you remember, the water table is the stored water underground. Why does it stay there? Because when it rains, the water percolates through the ground, moves through the soil until it reaches impermeable rock, and then it builds up underground. Normally that water does not reach the surface, but where the land is lower, some of the water may reach the surface. It forms these ponds called tobas. People often live near tobas because after the wet season in the summer in the Thar Desert, they fill up with water because the water table has risen, and consequently provides water for both the animals like camels and for people and their crops. However, these tobas are ephemeral. Ephemeral means they're not there all the time. It's spelt E-P-H-E-M-E-R-A-L. They are ephemeral water supplies. They only last during the rainy season, July and August. So what have people done about it? Well, they've created man-made versions of these. These are called johads, and they are spread all across the rural areas in the Thar Desert. They have solid floors so the water doesn't sink through the ground, and they can be covered, so there's less evaporation. Consequently, they hold on to water and store water for much longer periods. This more effectively allows people to settle. You can see these constructions in the background as small towns grow around these johads. So this challenge of a lack of precipitation has to some extent been solved near the main urban areas, but not everywhere. Only a limited number of people with access to technology like drills and concrete can build johads and can build pipes that provide clean water, mainly within the cities, and can construct boreholes, which are long, deep wells that reach the water table located underground. The poor farmers who live in rural areas, consequently, cannot settle in the Thar Desert, and so almost 10% of the population in the Thar Desert is nomadic, which means they are moving around constantly. They do not settle anywhere. That's why they live with camels, because camels are so perfectly adapted to desert life. So the lack of precipitation has changed people's lifestyles and made them nomadic in the rural areas. Additionally, when they do farm for crops, both the rural nomads and the urban farmers, they grow crops that are either drought resistant, such as millet, or they grow them near the limited water supplies, either the johads or the Indira Gandhi Canal. Consequently, the areas around the Indira Gandhi Canal in the Thar Desert have the highest population densities because they supply water. Much as in Egypt, where most people, almost 96%, live around the River Nile because of the water supply. Okay, time to assess learning. I'm going to ask you some questions, write them down, and then we will discuss the answers. Question 1. What is meant by economic productivity? You should have said that economic productivity is the amount of money that people can make in a certain amount of time. So, for example, the more work you can do in a day as a construction worker, the more money you make, so you are more productive. Question 2. Explain 2 factors that limit the economic productivity of agriculture in the Thar Desert. The first is the heat, you should have said, because it reduces people's ability to conduct physical labor during the day because they get fatigued, tired. You should have also said the rainfall patterns mean that for much of the year there is drought. Consequently, crops struggle to grow, leading to reduced crop yields. Question 3. What could the government invest in that would attract migrants to the Thar Desert to work there and could improve the incomes of people who trade their goods or their crops? You may have said a number of possible ideas, but the focus should have been on transport. The government could invest in better transport, for example, more reliable railways that can resist heat better than roads, or perhaps more roads, or it could invest in some kind of technology that would prevent the roads from being damaged by the heat or the sand from going over the roads. For example, afforestation along roads shields the roads from sand. These investments might help improve the economy of the Thar Desert by allowing more trade and migration and commuting to work. Okay, time to embed learning. Read the questions, write them, and then answer them using your understanding, and then mark your answers. Go for it. So number 1, make sure you have both of these points. 2, challenge in the Thar Desert that limits overland trade. Again, make sure you have both of these points. 3, suggest 2 ways that investment in transport infrastructure in the Thar Desert may lead to economic growth. Important. So economic growth, people having more money. Investment when the government or someone spends money on something, hoping for a profit. Both of these points. Ideally, you should have examples like this. Barma is a very poor town in the Thar Desert, whereas Jaisalmer is much richer because of tourism. 4, explain 2 ways that the precipitation patterns in the Thar Desert have affected people's lifestyles. You should have said any 2 of these points. About how people become nomadic, about johads, about the canal, or discouraging tourism because of heavy rainfall in summer. Give yourselves a mark out of the total and add in green pen any parts that you didn't get or got wrong. Go back through the explanations again if you didn't understand any of these questions. From this lesson, write 2 questions. Answer them from memory, and then test yourselves on them in a week to see if you still have held on to these ideas. Well done. I hope you've gained an understanding of both the opportunities for people and the challenges of living in the Thar Desert and the extent to which they've overcome them. However, one major issue that we didn't fully address in this lesson was the challenge of something called desertification, which means the spread of infertile land, deserts, in the Thar Desert and others around the world. It is an important problem that the people in the Thar Desert face, and they've come up with some clever solutions which have tried to tackle it. Over the next 2 lessons, we are going to be exploring what desertification is, what causes it, and how we can solve it. Join me.